So maybe to just kick things off on the topic of international exposure, this is something that we get asked a lot at Singapore Global Network as well. How important is international exposure when it comes to career planning? In the past, Singapore used to be quite traditional. We would be afraid of brain drain. These days, I think we are trying to encourage Singaporeans to get out there, gain international exposure, and you don't always have to think about faraway places like the US or UK, even Southeast Asia. That's valuable. But actually, what are your take on this?
I think there's two fundamental things that have to be addressed. One is the employers need to recognise if someone's got some great skills that they've learned abroad, that they're not irrelevant to the local market. They are very much relevant. And sometimes I think, in my personal experience, whether any country, the local employers have got to get their head round. If someone's been in California or London or Switzerland or Australia, it's not that they haven't got, for example, Singaporean experience. They've got some great transferable competencies and skills and attitudes that they can bring here. I think Singapore, to me, has the least number of diaspora that go abroad long term compared to perhaps some other countries I've worked in. But to leave Singapore and go to Australia, go to America, go to Europe, they are doing a really good thing because they're getting international perspective and they're getting a different viewpoint on maybe the same industries. Anybody who's got the opportunity to get international experience in an increasingly global world, I think they're giving themselves a competitive advantage. So that's the what. The how, one of the bits of advice I give to anyone watching this is it helps if you pick a company that's got an international presence. I've always said you don't have to change companies to change jobs. So when people are job seeking, if they seek companies which have got an international network and have got the ability to demonstrate people can move from country to country to country, I think that's a good thing. But if not, I would always recommend for curious people to be curious abroad. The technique then is for them to be able to articulate why that experience that they've learned in a different part of the world can bring benefit to an employer here. And I think we'll come on to that. I think that's an important question that sometimes people fail to think through.
So to exactly what Andrew shared, I think if you have the opportunity to go overseas and gain international exposure, I would highly recommend it. And I'll share a personal story. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Australia and do my degree there, then went to China for 8 years and worked there. Just having the exposure to working in different environments and picking and choosing what I think could work, and it actually was quite beneficial for myself personally. You pick up cultural nuances and you pick up different language skills. For example, at 8 years in China, you eventually have to learn how to speak Mandarin. And I come back here and I think, okay, at least I've got a new skill that I can use and settle in. We've seen even at work when we see clients actually want to look at candidates specifically with experience from other parts of the world so that they can either bring in, again, like a certain perspective on problem solving or technology. We've been running Balik Kampung, which is this initiative targeting Singaporeans globally to come back over the last 9.5 years. And through the campaign, we're really starting to see even more Singaporeans now. It is sexy to go overseas and gain that experience, whether it's education, whether it's to work, because there are organizations who actually will say, hey, you know what, if we would want to hire somebody, a Singaporean who's got the international exposure, who could come in and look at things differently. If the opportunity presents itself, I'd say do it.
I'll give a good working example. If you look at regulatory and compliance in banks post the global financial crisis, I think it's fair to say that the need to have closer scrutiny was an absolute decision that came out of the back, particularly in Europe. So you had a variety of frameworks that hadn't come to Asia first. They were rolled out across Europe. Anybody who was Singaporean who'd worked at a bulge bracket bank across Europe and had put in those frameworks successfully had a real opportunity to come back to Singapore and help Singapore put in place things that the Monetary Authority of Singapore subsequently would roll out. My point to that is I think sometimes when people do come back with some amazing experience, so absolutely first-class leading edge experience, they assume people understand the value and the benefit of that to the local domestic economy. And I think sometimes candidates, as I'd refer to them, those employees, just need to think about how they can articulate that in a simple way to how it will benefit this market. Because sometimes there's a danger of it being discounted. Well, look, that was California, that was Europe, that's not relevant to here. It really is. It's just that I think sometimes people assume that people will understand that it was relevant, and they've got to make a better case when they're applying for roles here to articulate why that brings value and benefit to the Singapore commercial economy. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that, you know, when candidates or job seekers come back, they're able to articulate what they've learned, whether it's technical or soft skills, or, you know, in the interview process, because again, you know, that is critical part of being assessed suitability within a job. I'll share some personal experiences because you pick up so many things through your journey living overseas. And what is it that companies want from me? Where can I really contribute? And that does become a little bit tricky, but that's when the importance of the interview comes into play. And there's so many tips and tricks of how to navigate through interviews, questions to ask, questions not to ask, or things not to say.
We'll get to interviews in a bit, but the one part that I wanted to probe a little bit more on is, so if I'm someone that's really quite convinced that yes, I do want to get international exposure. In fact, I see myself having a career, you know, spread across many different regions around the world. What would you say is the value of having experience in Singapore specifically? Clocking a few years in Singapore, what's the real value of that?
Look, Singapore is a very advanced economy that does a lot of things right. So its transparency is excellent. Its right of recourse through the courts of law from a commercial point of view is very, very helpful for business. Okay, its regulatory frameworks are again very transparent, and it has got a advanced mentality. And for people in Singapore who haven't been abroad often, your embracing of technology and the digital world here. Anybody who's filled out an income tax return in Britain will understand how far advanced Singapore is. Okay, I can do it in 4 minutes here. I have to pay someone to do it for me in the United Kingdom. So on an anecdotal basis, you're going to learn a lot here that is transferable to take back. I think Singapore has got huge gains and advancements on the use of technology in the general working environment and the wider infrastructure.
I was putting myself in the position when, you know, going from Singapore and then moving outside, and what were the first few things that really hit you? And you end up taking a lot of things for granted. Like when I moved to China, I was comparing, again, no right or wrong, but I was comparing to what I was used to. And I think for jobs, anybody with Singapore experience who want to go out and look for open mindset, learn and embrace new cultures, new ways of working, because it's not going to be the same.
One of my observations for people looking to come to Singapore, why should you bring your talents to Singapore? There's a decency in this society that is sometimes absent in other parts of the world. And do not underestimate how attractive that is if you can work with a very focused workforce who is law-abiding, compliant, and wants to be the best version of themselves every day. Singapore doesn't produce any raw materials, produces very, very good employees. That's one of my observations.
Very unique set of values, I think.
Yeah. And you would say that global businesses based abroad will kind of value that Singapore experience itself.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe if we could just pivot over to resumes and interview writings, because one of the areas that sometimes we get asked for advice, which we are not in a good place to offer, is what are common pitfalls or top tips or advice when it comes to how do I stand out when crafting a resume? How do I approach, you know, preparing for interviews? What some of your personal advice be on this topic?
For anybody wanting to get a new role, 2 bits of advice I give people wherever possible. You're a lot more employed than unemployed. So don't quit your job and then try and find another job. Okay, stay low, use your current company as your safe harbour while you're exploring the job markets. I see these days too many people in a flouncy manner. They quit their job and they're going to get the ideal job. So if you're employed, someone will pay you more money to leave your current employer. If you're not employed, they'll pay you less money. The second tip I'd give is too many people have a boilerplate CV that they send out. We talked about technology earlier. Increasingly, keywords, key recognitions, key phrases are the first cut and scan automatedly or through technology to look at a resume. My advice to anybody who sees a job advert that they like is whether they old-fashioned print it off and get out the highlighter pen, look at the action words, the demanding words, look at what the role is asking for, and then customize the CV to play back to the employer your career history in the context of that role. Far too many people send out 100 of the same CVs and they get into what I describe as a self-defeating death spiral of depression. I've sent out 100 applications and I've got nowhere, haven't even had a nibble. And then the third thing I would say is follow up. Do some research, find if you know someone in the company. Oh, you know, I know someone at Singapore Global Network, I've just applied for this role. Who would I speak to? Can I have a word? So them are 3 top tips. You know, customize your CV, okay? Stay employed while you're looking for a new role, and don't just sit there and wait for them to call you.
Be hungry.
Yeah, be hungry, yeah, and hustle. Yeah, be different.
I think people forget to understand that the resume is potentially one of the most important documents that you'd have, because it is literally the first impression a potential employer will have of you. So even something like incorrect spelling or bad formatting, and it's interesting to still see resumes of highly experienced job seekers or candidates with the most simplest mistakes. And it's unfortunate because essentially, you know, if a potential employer sees that, they're already going to make some assessments and judgments, which is unfair, but it's just the reality. So aside from some of the tips that Andrew has shared, taking that extra minute or 5 minutes to just make sure that it's clean, it's simple, it's straight to the point, customizable. I think, again, it's really unfortunate because when we interview candidates and we look at them and go, hang on a minute, we've just spent an hour talking to you and your CV says all of this, but they're sharing something maybe slightly different and they're not really selling themselves as well as they are on paper. And that's where we also then go into the detail of, okay, you've exceeded, give an example, you've achieved exceeded sales targets. How many %? So, you know, what we've seen is a lot of companies want to see tangible benefits, targets. Okay, I've exceeded targets by X %. I've achieved, again, the data, the statistics and the facts, when you're backed by actual numbers, makes your application so much more credible than just sort of generic statements. So take the time to really understand, to really put those types of statements in there. In fact, what we've also suggested to quite a few candidates is you have a master document where you literally put everything in and then customize every single application. Just pick and choose, you know, the top 5 responsibilities that matches the requirements. Because again, you know, it takes about 7 seconds for somebody, a potential employer, to look at a CV and already make an assessment. On an average, it takes 7 seconds. So you literally have 7 seconds to capture that person's attention, because if you're not, a hiring manager is already going through a series of other applications.
Yeah, and just on that, I would encourage any job seeker to put themselves in the shoes of the person who's going to receive sometimes 2,000 CVs online for that one role. Sometimes I get a CV which can be up to 12 pages. No one's going to read that. I mean, 2 pages, 1 page, bang, impact statement. I agree with Monty 110%. Dollar signs and percentage signs and facts sell a CV more than huge 2-page mission statements about what your next role is going to be.
I got to ask this, do cover letters still matter? Is it worth one's time in drafting a cover?
Yes, I actually think they do. My personal view is yes.
We've had differing sort of opinions on that. Listen, I think if it's required, then great. And don't get me wrong, I think cover letters make a difference, but I think if you're going to spend a lot of time preparing the resume, then you would spend more time on that. When we've surveyed hiring managers, okay, so what's the first thing you look at when you look at a CV? The first thing their eyes go to is the employment history. It's not even the education, it's just straight to the employment history and where they're working. The second thing they look at is the duration. So then it's like, how long have they been? Education and the summary comes third and fourth after that. So it's just the way the eyes scan and they go, and that's where they look at. Cover letter sometimes is required by some, again, more from a process, so it goes into a system. Again, not to say that it's not important, but again, we've had differing sort of requests from clients saying, we need a cover letter, we don't need a cover letter. Okay, but do you read it? Well, some do, some don't. You know, so
my personal view is I like a covering letter. Saying thank you. Now here's a really interesting thing. So few people these days, if you imagine from the hiring manager's point of view, that hiring manager might have just given up an hour of their life and they're going to get home to their children late, and they've interviewed 5 people that day. 4 people don't do anything and 1 person writes via their email or snail mail a thank you letter saying, dear Monty, thanks for making time for me today. I'd just like to reiterate my interest in your company. I came away inspired, and if you need further information about me for this role, I just wanted to reconfirm my interest in this opportunity. I don't know about how you feel about that, Monty, but I think saying thank you and reconfirming your interest and not assuming that you are the best candidate. I mean, people forget there are other people who want your job.
I suppose so then things like cover letters, post-interview emails, these are means to showcase personality and character, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of job seekers who don't realize the importance of closing that loop and actually showing that you appreciate the experience.
Those are really practical and useful tips when it comes to conveying a compelling sort of experience and background. But these days, at the same time, it's not just the know how, it's also the know who that helps you get a job. And I suppose what's your advice in terms of being able to expand your circle of connections in such a way that you can work those relationships to your advantage when securing an interview or securing a job even?
If people don't know where you want to get to, they can't help you get there. There's nothing wrong with networking. But what I would say to people is they've got to do it regularly and keep in touch. It's a bit like when someone who purports to be my friend suddenly rings me and I haven't heard from them for 8 years. My cynical response is, what do you want? So I think if you're going to network, I think first of all, explain to people that you're interested in their company and you'd like to find more about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think people need to be respectful that they're not the only people who are networking. So I think sometimes it's about giving back to the individual and it being a two-way process. But I think networking is necessary. Everyone hates it, I think, if we're really honest. It's turning up to networking events is like the worst dating experience ever. Everyone's avoiding talking to each other and all that. I think it's necessary, but I think just think about what you want to get out of that relationship and be honest with people.
It's network smart versus network hard, right? It is important. I think getting to know people in the industry, really understanding what is going on, will help any individual with, again, building an impression or reputation within the industry. And especially we've seen, for example, certain candidates looking for a role, and I will always say to them, go to these industry events, go to the FinTech Festival, where they, whatever it may be, and identify the areas that you want to specialize in. And being proactive and going out already says that you are brave. I think networking can also become, it could very easily cross the line of becoming
spam.
Yeah, and you can tell if you're on the receiving end of a message where you're one of 20 and it's a generic. So then, to me as an individual, I'm going, well, are you trying to get to know me? What value are you adding to me? Andrew points out it's a two-way thing. So, you also need to have something to give back to the person because they're investing in a relationship essentially with you. A network is two people network. There's a difference between networking smart and networking hard. You could spiral into networking where it doesn't really add value either to yourself or to the person that you're networking with. Sometimes it's a daunting task for someone to have to go and have a conversation. But as long as you go in prepared, you're adding value. As long as you are able to add value to the conversation and be able to just connect with somebody, and it doesn't even, again, it could be small talk, but bring yourself to a point where you're building a reputation within the industry. So I think if anybody is trying to get out there, look for opportunities to go to networking events. LinkedIn is also a great tool to connect with individuals. Again, could go horribly wrong if you're sending a mass message to a series of people. So it really needs to be done in a smart and a tactful way and not one of those sort of things that you just do without even giving it much thought.
No, I was just reflecting there, and I think you've got to be interesting to the person you want to talk to, but also have an opinion. If you're in an industry and you purport to be wanting to bring your skills and talents to a company, and you've gone to this conference, don't be surprised if that individual says, well, what do you think the latest trends are? If you sit there and go, it's not going to look good. People go to these networking events, have got to do the preparation as well. They can't just turn up and think that everyone's going to suddenly get their business card digitally and offer them 100 jobs. It doesn't work like that. You've got to add value to it.
Those are really great and superb advice. So for the next part of our segment, we have actually invited members of our SGN community to come to us with questions. There is a broad category from Singaporeans who are working abroad. These are Singaporeans with quite a bit of working experience in Singapore. They can't seem to land a job or even land interviews. Any advice on what they can do, seasoned Singaporean professionals abroad looking to come home? How can they find that opportunity?
Firstly, you've got to take a step back and understand applying for a job, regardless of wherever you are, is a long process. It's a time-consuming process. I can understand the frustration sometimes. You get a phone call and there's some interest in a role. Because I mentioned earlier on, when we run this Balik Kampung program, we talk to candidates overseas, Singaporeans overseas, about job opportunities. Sometimes it takes 6-12 months to land something. Again, you are physically not here. You've also got local candidates who are physically based here who are also interviewing for roles. If you're working through recruitment consultants, be proactive, reach out to them, continuously engage, find out, get some feedback. Why is it taking so long? We love getting phone calls from candidates sometimes. I mean, most times, because it shows also that the candidate's being proactive. But again, applying for a job, you've got to be patient. You've got to make sure that it's important. If you don't hear from your recruitment consultant, just reach out and get the feedback. I don't know if that resonates with you, Andrew.
Yeah, look, it does. Job hunting is about timing as well. If the individual applying puts themselves in the shoes of the hiring manager, normally they've got a hole in their business that they need to fill quickly. If they've got a tangible vacancy that they've got to fill, it's probably business critical and they need that person quite quickly. So I think there's two types of job seeking that people can think about as part of the Singaporean talent abroad, the diaspora. One is writing to people and saying, look, I'm going to be coming home within 3 months. What have you got? I'll move quickly. Versus having a smart way of approaching people saying, look, within the next 6 months to 12 months, I'm going to be coming back. These are the things I'd be interested in. I've done a lot of research on your company. I'm going to keep in touch regularly. If things are going to come up in the next 6 months, please ping me, call me, and I'll be able to, move quickly. I think the other side of it as well, you have to be persistent and you have to keep in the public eye of the individuals they're hiring. As I said before, most people are self-motivated, and if they've got a vacancy they need to fill quickly, and you're saying, I'm going to be back in 6 months, that's probably why they're not replying.
Great, good advice. I hope Shireen and Joyce found that useful. Another bucket of question comes from this time around graduates who are just about graduating. To them, they've done everything right by the book. They've studied hard, got strong GPAs to show for, made good use of their holidays, had relevant internships, but yet despite all that, still finding it a bit hard to land a job in today's job market. Do you have any advice for me?
Don't let perfection be the enemy of I got a job. Okay, so some people set out completely convinced that they want to do role X, and role X, let's say, has to have the following 10 things. My advice to anybody is that if it's got more than 5 of the 10 things you're looking for, seriously consider it and become employed. Because that way you're going to get some greater experience. That experience is going to add to your resume, your CV, and you'll be going to become more in demand as you add things. The main thing is sometimes people are seeking perfection with their first role. As I said before, you're a lot more employable employed than unemployed. And the other thing is hustle. Don't just send off the resume and wait and then get depressed. Find an in, find an angle, pick up the phone, email, follow up, without being too aggressive, but just redeclare your interest.
Well, I think for fresh grads, it's a bit different, right? Because again, you don't have the work history, the wealth of employment to back you up. But it does not take away from the approach that we talked about when you're writing a resume. And we've spoken to a few fresh grads looking to go out to the workforce. And I think what a lot of fresh grads forget to think about is what projects have they done to put into their resume that is aligned to the job that they're applying for. We spoke about customizing your resume to the job that you applied for, and a client's daughter who needed some advice. And you have a one-pager, but what projects did you do in school? What about the internship? Talk about everything that you've done in the internship. Really highlight the key achievements that you've accomplished during the internship, only relevant to the job that you're applying for. Because then it essentially also shows that you're putting in a bit of effort into your job application, which ties into the hustle.
So really being deliberate about building that personal narrative that speaks strongly to the role you're applying for.
Yeah.
And I suppose to Andrew's point, so don't be so picky, right? Try and see the potential in that job being a stepping stone to something else. And
I mean, Monty highlighted before about the importance of duration on a CV. And I think sometimes people's status anxiety is they want to tell their mates that they got the best job ever. Start with, I've got a role that is going to give me learning and earning. And I think the learning comes first with your first role when you graduate. The earning comes second. And then gradually it'll be earning, then learning. But keep learning and earning and take risks. You know, if it hasn't got the 10 things you want, as I said, If it's got 5, 6, 7, go for it.
It's useful advice. And the last question, sort of a different perspective, and this is one from an employer. So what do you feel are some of the most critical factors that businesses should pay attention to so as to attract and retain top talent in today's very competitive market?
Interesting, we've just done a survey of over 750 people locally about their sentiment and confidence towards the 2025 job market. So there's two parts to that question. One is how do you attract great people and how do you keep them? We do a survey every year around the sentiment and confidence of good people. So to attract the right people, first of all, I think you've got to sell a compelling vision. Smart people do have choices, and you're not going to be the only organisation that they're talking to. The second point I'd make is that that's got to be an authentic offering. If it's a case of it was a great sell at the interview, but actually, the meal looked lovely, but it tasted dreadful, then you're not going to keep that talent. And then I think the third thing is it's about the quality of the process. That employer is not going to be the only person looking to hire that talent. So they've got to get back quickly, they've got to follow up and all those good things. So they're probably 3 tips on the attraction. And then on the retention, I genuinely believe that everybody gets up in the morning wanting to be inspired and have a good day. So I think the leadership's got to be on point. And the vision and the execution of the company, I think good talent wants to see things going places. If the culture is good, people are learning and earning and getting a good experience with that organisation, they're the things that I think contribute to the retention.
And actually quite similar to what Andrew has shared, but I think we're not going to lie, of course, to attract, money is always going to play a big part. So compensation, benefits, but not just your base salary, it's understanding candidate sentiment and salaries going forward. But benefits actually, year on year has been something that candidates are looking out for. So, compelling insurance, like insurance packages or any specific types of allowances. Working from home, so flexibility has also come up as one of the top 3 reasons why candidates will pick a certain role is how many days do they get to work from home. So we've got some clients that we're working with, again, they're putting their employees through rigorous upskilling programs, so they're investing in the development of their employees. And if your employer is saying, you know what, Sherman, we're going to put you through a 2-year program, you're going to be upskilling in 3 different areas. So that just shows that you're also being valued. So there are ways that companies are trying to be a bit more creative on. It's not just about the money. Again, it does play a big part. But whether, again, as I mentioned, through upskilling or really just listening to feedback. Such a simple thing like an employee engagement survey and just being heard and actually providing a platform for your employees to really just share feedback. And then obviously not just that, but listening and actually taking these things into account goes a long way in terms of feel valued in an organization.
I got to ask this because I feel this is something that hiring managers are still trying to get a read on, and that's with regards to the Gen Z that are just joining the workforce in the last few years. Should one take a different approach to attracting and retaining Gen Zs? Like, is there a difference there in terms of what they prioritize for their careers and motivations?
I'd say to any employer, don't compromise on your culture and value. I think good organisations have enough to engage with multiple generations because organisations have not just Gen Z or Gen X or Gen Y or millennials. There are people in Gen Z who will aspire and want to work for a company with those organisational values and culture. I think our responsibility as an industry is to find the ones that really want to make a contribution to a good company, and those companies have got to be appealing to the workforce, which does include other generations in addition to Gen Z.
I remember when my generation was a thing and how much we had to put up with, and I think now there's Generation Alpha that's coming out after Gen Z. This is the future leadership, right? And this is essentially our role in a leadership team, or anybody in a leadership team, is to recognize talent, and that's also aligned to the organization's goals and values, because a lot of businesses, get to where they are because of the DNA that they create. So the challenge then becomes, for any employer, is how do you keep that authentic vision or the authentic company's values, and then keep in times with the next generation that have maybe a different set of values. And essentially, I think as long as you're keeping true to what you need to achieve, and I think regardless of what generation anybody's from, if they're on board with that, then I think that's the direction that everybody needs to go with.
Okay, so thank you so much, Monty and Andrew, for the valuable insights and sharing with us your time and expertise. I think today we've unpacked quite a bit in terms of macro-level job market insights in Singapore, especially what to expect for 2025, and also some personal tips for job seekers. So we hope the viewers out there found this useful, and thanks again for our guest speakers?
No, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherman.
Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah.